New Orleans, 1997. "Hey, y'all ever heard of voodoo death?" Mark asked, leaning back in his chair at the dimly lit bar. The air was thick with the smell of bourbon and cigarette smoke. Jazz music played softly in the background, but the atmosphere was heavy, almost as if the room itself was holding its breath. His friends Sarah and Jake exchanged glances. "Voodoo death? You mean like dying from a curse or something?" Sarah asked, intrigued but skeptical. "Exactly," Mark said, his eyes narrowing. "But it ain't just some mumbo-jumbo. It's real and it's terrifying. Happened right here in Louisiana, not too far from this very spot." Jake chuckled. "Man, you've had one too many. Voodoo death sounds like something out of a horror movie." Mark leaned in closer. "That's where you're wrong. It's science, psychology, and culture all rolled into one. Ever heard of Walter Cannon?" Sarah, a psychology major, perked up. "The guy who coined the term fight or flight." "The very same. He also coined the term voodoo death back in 1942. It's when someone dies from sheer emotional shock, like extreme fear. The body just shuts down. Heart rate spikes, blood pressure drops, and bam, you're a goner." Jake looked skeptical, but intrigued. "So, you're saying people can die from being scared to death?" "Exactly. And it's not just in far-off native societies. It's happened here, in the bayous of Louisiana, where voodoo is as real as the air we breathe." Sarah looked around the bar, her eyes lingering on an old painting of a voodoo priestess. "Okay, I'm hooked. Tell us more." Mark took a sip of his drink and began. It was the summer of '82. A local man named Robert had been accused of stealing from his neighbors. The community was tight-knit, deeply religious, and heavily influenced by voodoo beliefs. Robert was summoned to a community gathering where the local homegown, voodoo priest, publicly cursed him. Jake interrupted. "Wait, like, he put a hex on him?" "Exactly. The homegown used a voodoo doll, pins, the whole shebang. Within days, Robert started to deteriorate. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. His skin turned ashen. Doctors were baffled. They couldn't find a thing wrong with him. But Robert knew. He was convinced he was cursed and that he was going to die." "And did he?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark paused, letting the suspense build. "He died, all right. Autopsy showed no signs of poison, no disease, nothing. His heart just stopped. It was as if he willed himself to die, just by believing in the curse." The room fell silent, each lost in their thoughts, contemplating the eerie power of belief, culture, and the human mind. "Think about it," Mark said, breaking the silence. "The mind is a powerful thing. Powerful enough to kill? Now that's a question worth pondering." As they sat there, mulling over the unsettling tale, none of them noticed the old woman in the corner of the bar, her eyes fixed on a small handmade doll. Boston, Massachusetts, 2010. Dr. Emily Thompson sat in her cluttered office at Harvard University, surrounded by stacks of research papers, psychology textbooks, and a peculiar collection of voodoo artifacts. Her eyes were glued to her computer screen, reading an email from a colleague in New Orleans. The subject line read, "Urgent, new case of voodoo death." Emily's heart raced. This was the moment she'd been waiting for. A real, contemporary case that could validate Walter Cannon's theories and her own years of research into psychogenic death. She had studied the phenomenon from a psychological and physiological standpoint, but she'd never had the chance to observe a case firsthand. "Is it possible?" she whispered to herself. "Could this be the breakthrough I've been waiting for?" She booked the next flight to New Orleans, her mind buzzing with questions and theories. Could the mind truly wield enough power to cause its own demise? And if so, what did that say about the untapped potential or dangers of human psychology? New Orleans, 2010. Emily arrived in the Big Easy, a city pulsating with life, culture, and an undercurrent of mysticism. She met her colleague, Dr. Marcus Johnson, a local psychologist and an expert in voodoo culture. "Emily, you're not going to believe this," Marcus greeted her. "The case involves a young woman named Lisa, who believes she's been cursed by a voodoo priestess. She's showing all the classic symptoms: rapid weight loss, insomnia, extreme anxiety. And the doctors can't find anything physically wrong with her." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. "This is eerily similar to the Robert case from '82. We need to see her, Marcus. We need to study this before it's too late." They drove through the labyrinthine streets of New Orleans, finally arriving at a modest home in the heart of the city. Lisa's family welcomed them, albeit with a sense of desperation in their eyes. "Please help our daughter," Lisa's mother pleaded. "We don't know what to do anymore." Emily and Marcus entered Lisa's room, finding her lying on the bed, her eyes hollow, her face gaunt. She looked up and managed a weak smile. "Are you here to lift the curse?" she asked. Emily exchanged a glance with Marcus. "We're here to understand what's happening to you, Lisa, and hopefully find a way to help." As Emily set up her equipment to monitor Lisa's vitals, Marcus began asking her questions, delving into her beliefs, her fears, and the events leading up to her condition. "Do you believe in the curse, Lisa?" Marcus asked gently. Lisa's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't. Not at first. But now I can feel it, eating away at me. And I'm scared. So scared." Emily looked at the monitor. Lisa's heart rate was spiking, her blood pressure dropping. The symptoms were manifesting right before their eyes. As they left Lisa's home, Emily felt a mixture of excitement and dread. They were on the brink of a scientific breakthrough, but at the potential cost of a human life. "Marcus, we're running out of time," Emily said, her voice tinged with urgency. "We need to figure this out. We need to understand the mechanics of voodoo death, not just for science, but for Lisa." Marcus nodded, his face solemn. "And we need to do it fast. Because whether it's the power of belief or something more, the clock is ticking." As they drove away, neither noticed the shadowy figure watching them from a nearby alley, a voodoo doll clutched in her hand. Emily and Marcus spent the next few days immersed in research, poring over medical journals, psychology textbooks, and voodoo lore. They also visited local voodoo practitioners, trying to understand the cultural and spiritual aspects of Lisa's condition. According to voodoo belief, a curse can be lifted by a counterspell or by appeasing the spirits, Marcus explained as they walked through a market filled with voodoo paraphernalia, dolls, amulets, and potions. But would that work on Lisa? Her symptoms are real, even if they're psychogenic. Can a counterspell reverse the physiological effects? Emily wondered aloud. That's the million-dollar question, Marcus replied. If we can understand the psychological triggers, maybe we can find a way to counteract them. Back at Lisa's home, Emily and Marcus set up a controlled environment to monitor her vitals closely. They also invited a renowned Hungan, a voodoo priest, to perform a counterspell. "Are you sure about this?" Marcus asked, concern etched on his face. "It's a long shot, but we have to try," Emily responded, her eyes fixed on the monitors displaying Lisa's heart rate and blood pressure. The Hungan began the ritual, chanting incantations and sprinkling herbs around Lisa, who lay on the bed, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow. As the ritual reached its climax, the room seemed to vibrate with energy, and for a moment, Emily felt a shiver of doubt. What if this was real? What if they were meddling with forces they didn't understand? Then, the monitors beeped. Lisa's vitals were stabilizing. Her heart rate was returning to normal, her blood pressure rising. It was as if the counterspell had somehow reversed the physiological effects of the curse. Unbelievable, Marcus whispered, staring at the monitors in disbelief. As they were packing up their equipment, Lisa's mother approached them, tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "You've given us hope." Just then, Emily's phone buzzed. It was an email from a colleague back at Harvard who had been analyzing the data they'd sent. The subject line read, "Critical findings, the role of adrenaline." Emily opened the email and quickly scanned the contents. Her eyes widened as she read the conclusions. Elevated levels of adrenaline and other stress hormones could indeed trigger a cascade of physiological events leading to voodoo death. The counterspell had likely acted as a psychological reset, normalizing Lisa's hormone levels and stabilizing her vitals. "We did it, Marcus," Emily said, her voice tinged with awe and relief. "We've proven that voodoo death is a real, psychogenic phenomenon, and we've found a way to reverse it." Marcus smiled, but his eyes were thoughtful. "Yes, but at what cost? We've tampered with beliefs that are deeply rooted in this community. Have we played God?" Emily looked at Lisa, who was sitting up in bed, chatting animatedly with her family. "Maybe, but if playing God saves lives, isn't it worth it?" As they left Lisa's home, Emily felt a sense of accomplishment, but also a lingering doubt. They had unraveled one of the mind's darkest mysteries, but in doing so, had they opened Pandora's box. As they drove away, the shadowy figure from the alley appeared again, watching them intently. She smiled enigmatically, her eyes glinting in the fading light, and then vanished into the gathering darkness. Boston, Massachusetts, 2011. Emily was back at Harvard, presenting her groundbreaking research on voodoo death at a psychology conference. The room was packed, the air thick with anticipation. As she concluded her presentation, the audience erupted into applause. "Your research could revolutionize our understanding of psychogenic death," a colleague remarked during the Q&A session. "Thank you," Emily replied, "but we've only scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore, especially the ethical implications." 2 weeks later, Emily received a call from Marcus. His voice was shaky, filled with a sense of urgency she'd never heard before. "Emily, you need to come back to New Orleans. Something's happened, something we can't explain." "What is it?" she asked, her heart pounding. "It's Lisa. She's fallen ill again, but this time, it's different. It's as if the curse has returned, but stronger." Emily felt terrified. "I'll be there as soon as I can." Back in New Orleans, Emily and Marcus rushed to Lisa's home. The atmosphere was tense, the family's faces etched with fear and confusion. "Her vitals are worse than before," Marcus said, examining the monitors. And this time, the counterspell didn't work. Emily felt a sense of dread wash over her. What have we done? In trying to solve one mystery, have we unleashed something far more dangerous? Just then, the shadowy figure from the alley stepped into the room. It was an old woman, her eyes piercing, her presence commanding. "I am Mama Laveau," she announced, "a descendant of Marie Laveau, the voodoo queen of New Orleans. You have meddled with forces you do not understand." Emily felt a mixture of fear and fascination. "Can you help us? Can you save Lisa?" Mama Laveau looked at Lisa, her eyes softening. "The mind is a powerful tool, but it is also a fragile one. You have tampered with its natural balance, and now you must face the consequences. She began chanting, her voice resonating with an otherworldly power. The room seemed to darken, the air thickening with an unseen energy. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. Mama Laveau looked at the monitors. Lisa's vitals were stabilizing. "You have your answer," Mama Laveau said, turning to Emily and Marcus. "Science and belief are two sides of the same coin. You cannot have one without the other." As she left, Emily felt a sense of awe and humility. They had ventured into uncharted territory, pushing the boundaries of science and belief, only to discover that some mysteries are best left unsolved. Back at Harvard, Emily pondered the events of the past year. Her research had opened new doors, but it had also raised unsettling questions about the ethics of scientific exploration. As for Lisa, she recovered fully, but chose to leave New Orleans, seeking a fresh start away from the shadows of her past. And so, the enigma of voodoo death remains, a haunting reminder of the mind's untapped potential and the thin line between science and the supernatural. As Emily sat in her office, staring at the voodoo doll that now occupied a place on her bookshelf, she couldn't shake the feeling that their journey had only just begun.